G in action. Cameron Pearson, the founder and CEO of Hereditas Conservatio, a London-based technology company developing the world's first AI-powered platform for real-time cultural heritage risk assessment. With over a decade of experience in AI-enabled digital transformation, Cameron has led public sector technology deployments across Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia, personally negotiating multi-million euro government contracts in biometric systems, border management, and institutional digital infrastructure. Please welcome Cameron Pearson.
And I would love to say that I'm going to shorten my speech, but I'm not, so buckle in. So I'm Cameron, and it's an honor to be here in a storied venue, absolutely amazing. So my team and I, we run a technology-first company, and we address what we believe is one of ESG's most overlooked dimensions, cultural resilience. Now, when we discuss ESG priorities, we naturally focus on carbon reduction, renewable energy, and climate metrics. Now, we were wondering, if we're measuring our impact on natural heritage, forests, oceans, biodiversity, and quite rightly so, why aren't we systematically measuring our impact on cultural heritage? Now, the S in ESG includes cultural stewardship. Yet right now, whilst we can tell you the carbon footprint of almost any major project, we struggle to quantify its impact on irreplaceable cultural assets that underpin community identity, economic stability, and social cohesion. Now that's the gap Hereditas Conservatio, it's a bit of a tongue twister, exists to fill. And tonight I'll share a couple of things with some learnings about ESG data, stakeholder expectations, and long-term value creation through the lens of cultural preservation. So why is cultural heritage relevant to ESG conversations? I get this all the time. So one good example is EU's latest corporate sustainability reporting directive increasingly expects companies to assess their impact on cultural and social infrastructure. When major infrastructure projects such as ports, roads, urban development affect heritage sites, investors and regulators are asking, what's the social cost? How was it measured? And who signed off? Now, without quantifiable data, companies face reputational risk and regulatory uncertainty. We're seeing three key stakeholder groups demand better cultural impact data. The first being limited partners and impact investors. Now they want measurable social outcomes beyond employment figures. We have national governments. Now they face parliamentary scrutiny about almost anything, but especially cultural spending. Ministers need defensible prioritization frameworks, not political judgment calls dressed up as fancy policy. And local communities in heritage-rich regions, we find this a lot in the UK, they're becoming increasingly vocal. They understand that their cultural assets drive tourism revenues or economies worth billions. Yet they lack tools to demonstrate vulnerability or advocate for protection. Now here's the compelling economics. Annually, heritage tourism generates approximately £400 billion. It's a huge amount of money. Now for countries like Greece and Egypt, that represents up to 15% of the GDP. But that's not soft metrics. That's material economic infrastructure that shows up in sovereign credit ratings. Yet we're protecting it with manual surveys conducted every 3 to 5 years. The best example is the terrible destruction of Palmyra by ISIS in 2015, when the most recent risk assessments and reports were from 2010. Now that's sort of the equivalent of running a FTSE 100 company with quarterly reports from 2020. It's not just inadequate, it's actually negligent governance. Now we've developed what we call the Heritage Risk and Preservation Index. Think of it as a credit score, but for cultural vulnerability. We integrate multiple data sources, then our platform correlates these inputs into actionable risk scores, updated continuously, daily, hourly, monthly, but not every 5 years. For ESG reporting purposes, HRPI, because we love a fancy acronym, provides 3 critical metrics. Our risk exposure score quantifies immediate threats for these things like climate, conflict, and development pressure. Economic impact valuation calculates tourism revenue, employment, and supply chain dependencies, and these are tied to each heritage site. So when you know that Venice's cultural infrastructure supports 67,000 jobs, you understand the social cost, of inaction. Thirdly, intervention effectiveness tracks risk score changes following preservation investments, enabling genuine impact measurement. Now, did that £2 million, Francesca talked about the impact of flooding on Dubai. Well, we want to know, can we quantify the investment that future flood generation systems will have? Was it worth the investment? Was it worth the £2 million? And if you're advising portfolio companies on ESG strategy, consider this. Any business operating in heritage-rich environments now has measurable cultural impact exposure. So HRPI sort of enables them or you or us to demonstrate due diligence, quantify mitigation efforts, and report outcomes that satisfy both regulators and impact-focused investors. Now, the challenge many face is translating all of this heritage impact into language that limited partners and people like us or me, ESG auditors, actually understand and value. And that's the critical thing with any technology. So our data directly supports several established reporting standards. These are GRI standards, UN SDG alignment, specifically 11.4 and 8.9, and TCFD, which we spoke about earlier, climate risk. Heritage assets represent material economic infrastructure vulnerable to climate change. One of our early partners is based in Italy, and they're an infrastructure fund with $2 billion in property. Now, before we came together with them to partner, their generic ESG report noted we sort of respect local culture heritage and we comply with planning regulations, which sounds really nice and it's really simple. But now they can actually demonstrate that their portfolio represents 23% lower heritage risk exposure compared to sector benchmarks. Now, that's the difference between compliance theatre and genuine ESG performance. So when limited partners ask, how do you measure social impact? You can now provide standardized heritage risk scores across portfolio holdings, economic impact quantification, these are jobs, tourism revenue and supply chains, trend analysis showing a trajectory over time or over an investment period, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, and comparable benchmarks against industry peers. Now, this builds confidence, LP confidence, that you're managing social risk as rigorously as financial risk, which is equally, some would say, equally important. If I was to ask a direct question, which I've been asked, why should busy fund managers or managers in this sector prioritize heritage or cultural heritage assessment when they're already juggling carbon accounting, diversity metrics, and supply chain audits? Well, heritage conflicts destroy value rapidly and unpredictably. A £50 million development we worked with in the northeast of England recently faced community opposition, regulatory delays, and reputational damage, and they spent 40% more than their inflated budget. So it was significantly more, and all because cultural impact wasn't assessed early. Now, we provide an early warning. If your portfolio company is planning construction near a heritage site or heritage assets with rising risk scores, you can intervene before problems escalate, not before they make not when they've made the Financial Times. So as ESG reporting matures, limited partners increasingly differentiate between funds that tick boxes and funds that demonstrate genuine impact intelligence. While many funds have concentrated, and they do have, my family office included, exposure to heritage-rich regions, Mediterranean real estate, Middle East, North Africa infrastructure, and UK historic properties, without systematic heritage risk assessment, you're carrying unquantified concentration risk that sophisticated LPs will spot or eventually identify and penalize. So rather than viewing heritage assessment as a burden, consider it an engagement tool. So portfolio companies facing heritage challenges need strategic guidance, not just capital, which is the key. So money's not everything. Some would argue it is, but we are leaning more towards that. We could provide that intelligence that demonstrates value add beyond a balance sheet support. So using HRPI, we can identify 3 locations with deteriorating risk scores. For example, we worked with a caravan park company, and we can proactively diversify their offering before restricted areas are restricted for flood zones, natural disasters. So strategic foresight enabled by proper data. ESG in action means confronting practical challenges, not just elegant frameworks. Heritage data, as much data is by its very nature, is fragmented across languages, cultures, formats, jurisdictions. So a French Cultural and Heritage Ministry uses completely different data than an Egyptian one, for example. But we've created comparable metrics required and creating this required a standardization of all of this framework that translates into local assessments, translates into a universal risk score. This is directly analogous to carbon accounting before GHG protocols, where everyone measured things differently until standardization enabled meaningful, quick conversation or comparison. Now, we learned quickly that archaeologists, finance ministers, and local community leaders all needed vastly different metrics. So the solution we built is a multi-stakeholder dashboard. It presents the same underlying data, but through different lenses. It's built on consistent measurement, which is really exciting because you're no longer confused what that Egyptian cultural minister wants, and indeed what our British Minister of Culture wants can now be seen in very similar ways. So building trust has required co-design. We've worked with UNESCO missions, we've worked with cultural ministries and academic institutions in Rome, London, Auckland, New Zealand, Sydney, Melbourne. So the parallel to ESG adoption is clear. Now, stakeholders don't resist measurement. They resist measurement that doesn't reflect their operational reality, which I think is key. So successful ESG integration requires genuine consultation, not top-down mandates. A Polish representative told us from the Polish Ministry of Culture that our current method, as most things or a lot of things do in Europe, exists is on a static level, static Excel sheets and old UNESCO dossiers. So something live and integrated would be really useful. So genuine recognition that better tools enable better governance. We built our system because 75% of heritage sites across the world, there's thousands, don't think UNESCO, but we have 31 in the UK that are not UNESCO listed. Now, they face significant threats, and current tools are demonstrably failing. ESG initiatives generally succeed when they address genuine material risks, not when they chase reporting trends. Now, the governance breakthrough isn't just technology. It's that decisions have now become defensible. That minister we spoke about earlier that allocates £50 million to heritage preservation can now justify it with quantifiable risk reduction, and it's not political expediency. Which brings me finally full circle to tonight's broader theme. As we consider ESG frameworks and stakeholder expectations, I'd encourage us to think beyond compliance toward genuine stewardship. Cultural heritage protection isn't typically a line item in ESG reports, but maybe it should be. When companies operate in heritage-rich environments, which we've discussed, their impact on cultural resilience is just as measurable and material as their carbon footprint. Now, the tools exist, and what's needed is a recognition that ESG excellence means addressing all of the questions or dimensions holistically of our social and environmental impact, including the foundations, cultural foundations that make communities resilient, economies viable, and societies cohesive. Thank you.